welcome to the debate. What if the greatest villain in ancient literature wasn't, a reptile at all? I mean, what if the serpent in the Garden of Eden, the actual catalyst for the fall of humanity, was actually a piece of human anatomy?
I mean, it sounds almost absurd at first glance, right?
Oh, completely absurd.
But if you are studying theology, you know the profound temptation to treat the Genesis narrative like a Sunday school diorama. We really like our biblical agents to have these clear, safe boundaries.
Oh, absolutely. We put the tree over here, the man and woman in the center, and the talking snake safely behind a pane of glass.
Exactly. It's deeply comforting to point to an external reptile and say, well, there is the source of the transgression.
But today we are demanding the kind of seminary-level rigor that really shatters that glass diorama. We are diving into the NLM source material, which is this rigorously analytical theological framework.
Right.
And it presents a radically different ontology, meaning the very nature of human existence in the garden is far more complex and terrifyingly intimate than a talking animal.
Right, because the NLM framework suggests the serpent is not a distinct reptilian species at all.
No.
It posits that the serpent is actually a physiological extension of Adam himself, specifically his reproductive organ, which emerged after the division of his initial, androgynous state.
Exactly. And our inquiry today really centers on this precise theological crossroad. I mean, the core question is, does reading the serpent as an anatomical extension perfectly resolve the etiology, the root cause of the Genesis curses?
Or, on the other hand, does it problematically collapse the distinct theological agency required for the fall?
Right, so I will argue that interpreting the serpent as an internal, biological extension perfectly aligns with the text's theology of lack. And I think it provides the most coherent, direct origin story for the specific curses of childbirth and agricultural toil.
And I will counter that while the text firmly roots the fall in the creation of human lack, reducing the serpent strictly to Adam's localized anatomy just ignores a massive textual reality.
Which is?
Well, the text explicitly asserts the serpent possesses distinct speech and a unique linguistic connection to Eve. This demands we analyze the serpent as a broader, symbolic extension of autonomous agency and emergent desire.
Well, before we get into the weeds of linguistic agency, I think we have to establish the sheer structural elegance of the NLM text thesis.
Sure, let's lay the groundwork.
It requires us to completely abandon the theological gymnastics preachers usually rely on, the ones trying to explain how a literal snake could talk.
Right, or why God would put a trap in a perfect garden to begin with.
Exactly. Instead, the text starts with the state of Adam, in what we might call the holodeck of Eden. I mean, Adam was initially a dual unity.
Right, the androgynous state before the separation of the sexes.
Precisely. And the source material uses gematria to really establish this perfection.
And for those listening who might not be deep into Hebrew numerology, gematria is the ancient practice of assigning numerical value to words.
Yeah, exactly. So the text points out that Adam was made in the image of the divine name, YVH, which has a gematria value of 26.
And the Hebrew word for one, echad, has a value of 13.
Yes, twice 13 equals 26.
Mathematical perfection.
Literally two halves making a perfect, mathematically complete one. In this state, Adam is completely without lack. He is totally sufficient.
Therefore, no mistake is made. The prohibition against eating the fruit was established under this absolute perfection.
Right. I think any serious theology student really has to appreciate that androgynous separation framework. The gematria elegantly establishes the transition from a state of complete divine sufficiency to a state of, fractured human longing.
But the transgression only becomes mechanically possible once that lack is introduced. God separates Eve out of Adam.
Right. The split. Now, by identifying the serpent as an expressive part of Adam, which the text notes can be aroused with Adam's passive involvement, the framework brilliantly solves the mechanics of the fall.
Okay, but how exactly?
The forbidden act isn't the chewing of a magical apple. It is pleasurable, intimate interaction leading to pregnancy. The anatomical reading takes abstract theology and grounds it in brutal biological reality.
Okay, I see the elegance there. But relying on a purely biological reading here creates a massive textual contradiction.
I really don't see a contradiction.
Well, the text explicitly demands rigorous analysis, and part of that rigor is addressing every single clause. The source material states that all three agents get cursed.
Right.
It also specifies that the snake shows some kind of agency of its own.
Sure, some kind.
If the serpent is merely Adam's physical appendage, a biological mechanism operating on passive arousal, it simply cannot possess the distinct intellectual agency necessary to persuade Eve outside of God's commands.
You are jumping straight to the persuasion without looking at the environment that makes that persuasion possible.
Okay, unpack that.
Before we debate the snake's agency, look at the ontological shift that just happened. A complete being was torn in half. Think of this theological separation like nuclear fission.
Fission. Okay.
You have a perfectly stable, unified atom. When you split it, you create incredibly volatile, highly reactive elements that naturally, inevitably seek to bind with something else to find completion.
Right, they want to become stable again.
Exactly. The serpent in this literal reading is quite literally the biological mechanism of that new volatility. It is the anatomical reality of physical longing.
The fission analogy works for the physics of separation, I'll give you that. But human desire isn't just blind radiation.
It's not?
No, it's targeted. And the radiation produced by that split isn't just physical. It introduces an entirely new third variable into the garden.
A third variable.
Yes. Look at how the text describes Eve post-separation. It says Eve showed acute inspiration outside of God's commands.
Which is clearly driven by the new physical bodies they inhabit.
But that inspiration is not merely a biological urge. It is conceptual. It is imaginative.
I don't know if I agree it's purely conceptual.
Well, if the serpent is just Adam's anatomical mechanism for physical completion, it doesn't account for the acute inspiration of disobedience that arises in Eve.
Why not?
The biological volatility you're describing is a drive, yes, but what the text describes happening in the garden is a persuasion. It's a dialogue of desire.
But how does that dialogue start? It starts with the very physical nature of the entity triggering the reaction.
How so?
The text provides a fascinating exegetical detail regarding how Adam names the snake.
The naming, right.
It says, the one called snake is not thus called because of consensus, but rather because of a contingent choice of Adam.
Break down what you mean by contingent choice for the listeners. I think that's key here.
So, when Adam named the other animals, he supposedly saw their essence. But with the snake, the text says Adam recognized it as embodying the form of a snake without necessarily having its essence.
Okay.
This is the smoking gun for the anatomical theory. Adam is looking at an expressive part of his own newly separated gendered body. It is capable of movement.
Yeah.
It operates, as the text explicitly says, with his passive involvement.
Meaning he doesn't consciously command it to respond.
Exactly. It operates independently of his rational will. In the holodeck reality of Eden, a realm where spiritual and physical realities are not yet separated, this biological imperative speaks.
Speaks, right.
Yes, it drives them toward the fruit of intimacy. The speech isn't vocal cord vibration.
Right.
It is an overwhelming, deafening voice of a newly introduced biological lack. The great deceiver wasn't a monster hiding in the bushes. The text is trying to tell us the monster was our own newly discovered biology.
Okay, I hear you. You are equating the speech of the serpent to the internal hum of a biological imperative.
Basically, yes.
But again, you are ignoring the specific mechanics of the text. The source material specifies that the snake is likely more understanding of the language of Eve.
Okay.
This is the absolute crux of the issue. If the serpent is simply Adam's biological drive, his localized anatomy, why is its primary linguistic and persuasive connection with Eve?
Well, that's simple.
Is it? Why does it understand her language better than it understands Adam's?
Because it is the very instrument physiologically designed to bridge the gap between them.
Oh, come on.
No, seriously. The biological imperative of the male anatomy is entirely oriented toward the female. It understands the language of Eve in the sense that it is teleologically directed toward her.
Teleologically directed, okay.
In plain English, its entire biological purpose, its end goal, is to find completion in her. It bypasses Adam's top-down rational obedience to God's prohibition because it is a bottom-up biological drive aimed squarely at Eve.
I understand the mechanism you're proposing, but you are reducing language and understanding to mere biological lock and key mechanics.
I'm keeping it grounded in the text.
No, the text is exploring something vastly more sophisticated about human consciousness. Eve's acute inspiration happens outside of God's commands.
Right.
It involves a conceptual leap into autonomy. If the snake understands the language of Eve, it means the snake represents the emergent intersubjective reality between them.
Intersubjective meaning what, exactly, in this context? Let's not get too abstract.
It's not abstract, meaning the shared psychological space between two distinct minds. When you split the dual unity, you don't just get a man with a new organ and a woman. You get a space between them.
Okay.
You get the autonomous, terrifying force of untethered desire. That desire has an agency of its own. It speaks a language of persuasion that speaks directly to Eve's newly separated state.
But to reduce this to just a shared psychological space...
I'm not reducing it. To restrict this strictly to anatomy strips the text of its profound psychological theology. It makes the fall a story about puberty, rather than a story about the birth of human autonomy.
Wow. I strongly disagree that it strips the text of its theology. On the contrary, it rescues the theology from becoming a vague philosophical exercise.
Vague?
Yes. It prevents us from drifting into abstract allegories about shared psychological spaces that lose contact with the dirt and the earth. And the strongest evidence for the anatomical reading lies precisely in the etiology of the three curses.
The origin of the punishments.
Yes. If we want to know what the crime was, look at the punishment. What happens when God reacts to the consumption of this so-called fruit?
God curses Eve with pain and childbirth.
Exactly. And God curses Adam with the toil of agriculture. Why those specific curses?
Because the realization of reproduction requires survival.
Because the forbidden act involved pleasurable, intimate interaction leading to pregnancy. Now Eve must bear the pain of that physical, biological reality.
Right.
And Adam faces the grueling expectation to become a provider for the resulting family. The punishment perfectly, logically fits the crime. The biological reading provides a locked-in, one-to-one translation of why the human condition is characterized by childbirth and labor.
Okay, the link to childbirth and labor is undeniable, I'll grant you that. But your anatomical reading completely falls apart on the third curse.
I really don't believe it falls apart at all. The text addresses it beautifully.
How?
The text demands that all three agents get cursed. God curses the woman, the man, and the serpent.
Right?
If the serpent is just Adam's anatomy, then cursing the serpent is effectively just a second curse on Adam. You collapse the theological agency entirely.
I disagree.
In other words, if the snake is just Adam's body part, God is cursing Adam twice, which completely breaks the tripartite structure of the story.
But look at the specific wording of the curse on the snake in the NLM framework. The text states that Adam has to drag his snake with him and be responsible over it.
Okay, but
In a post-lapsarian world, the world after the fall, the male biological drive, this localized anatomy, becomes a heavy burden.
a burden. Yes, it requires constant responsibility. It is a physical weight he must carry and manage. This takes a story told to children and reveals a terrifying adult reality about the burden of the flesh.
I see what you're saying.
The curse on the snake is the realization that this biological drive will be a lifelong source of friction and responsibility.
But quasi-independent biological friction is not independent enough to warrant a distinct theological curse on par with the man and the woman.
Why not?
To maintain the rigorous analysis this source demands, the seminary-level analysis we talked about, all three agents getting cursed must mean there are three distinct loci of judgment.
Even if they originally started as one unified being?
Yes, precisely, because the separation created something genuinely new. If the snake represents the symbolic force of untethered desire, a force born from the physical separation, yes, but now possessing its own momentum and conceptual agency.
Right. Then the curse on the snake is a curse on desire itself. It means this intersubjective force is condemned to be a permanent, base, burdensome reality for humanity.
Okay, yes, Adam drags it. Yes, he is responsible for it. but it is a curse on the relational dynamic of desire, separate from the physiological punishment of childbirth and the environmental punishment of agricultural labor.
Expanding the serpent into a grand symbol of intersubjective desire feels very poetic, I'll admit that.
It's not just poetry, it's theology.
But the text warns us against avoiding the simplest reading that an adult can hear and feel convicted by.
Simple doesn't mean reductionist.
Wasn't an external devil, but the biological reality of our own reproductive drives operating without our conscious consent.
Visceral, sure.
He looked at himself post-separation and recognized a form through a contingent choice.
But why does demystification require biological reductionism?
Because it anchors the text. The theological weight of the NLM framework is that it locates the fracture of humanity precisely in the biological mechanics of intimacy, pregnancy, and provision.
That's part of it, yes.
The lack created the longing, the localized anatomy provided the means, and the result was the burden of human history.
You can demystify the magic apple and the talking reptile without reducing the entire story to mere anatomy. The authors of this theology were articulating something incredibly sophisticated about human consciousness.
I think biology is pretty sophisticated.
When the text says Adam and Eve finally discover what they did, and they let humanity know so everyone feels shame and guilt, that shame isn't just about nakedness or anatomy.
What is it about then?
It's about the realization of autonomous agency. The realization that we are driven by forces like desires, language, persuasion that operate outside of divine command.
Right.
The snake must be analyzed as a symbolic extension because it represents the exact moment human beings became susceptible to inspiration outside of God. It is the birth of the other voice.
Okay.
To limit that other voice strictly to Adam's reproductive organ diminishes the magnitude of Eve's intellectual agency and the massive complexity of the temptation.
But if the serpent is this abstract other voice of desire, how does Adam physically drag it with him?
Well,
The language used in the source material is startlingly tactile. It doesn't say he wrestles with an abstract concept. It says he drags his snake and is responsible for it.
dragging a burden isn't always physical. We drag our desires, our relational fractures, the consequences of our autonomous choices with us every single day.
That's a metaphor.
No, the responsibility over it is the ethical responsibility over our emergent, subjective desires. The text brilliantly maps the physical realities of reproduction onto the man and woman, while isolating the catalyst of that reproduction, the autonomous, persuasive desire, as the serpent.
Well, it seems we have reached the foundational bedrock of our disagreements regarding the exact mechanics of this text.
I think so.
So, to summarize my position, I maintain that the text's anatomical interpretation provides a radically coherent, grounded origin story for the fall.
Right, the biological grounding.
Exactly. By interpreting the serpent literally as the reproductive organ, an expressive part aroused with passive involvement, we directly link the introduction of lack to the biological realities of reproduction.
Okay.
It answers exactly why the specific curses of childbirth and providing for a family were chosen. And it brilliantly explains how the biological imperative bypasses rational obedience. It is the most terrifyingly adult reading of the mechanics of transgression.
And to summarize my stance, while I completely agree that the theology of lack and separation is the profound engine of this narrative, the text's attribution of distinct language, conceptual, persuasive capability, and a unique understanding of Eve to the serpent requires us to treat it as a profound symbolic extension.
Right, the symbolic angle.
Yes, it represents emergent, intersubjective desire. Reducing it to Adam's localized anatomy collapses the required theological agency and essentially turns a tripartite curse into a redundant punishment on the man, ignoring the complex relational psychology of the fall.
Despite our divergence on whether the serpent is literal biology or a symbolic extension of desire, I think there is a crucial point of convergence here.
What's that?
Both of us absolutely agree that moving past the superficiality of a literal talking reptile is essential for anyone seriously studying theology.
Oh, unquestionably. Viewing Eden through this advanced exegetical lens, understanding the math of the dual unity, the tragedy of the separation, and the terrifying realities of emergent desire,
It opens up incredibly rich avenues for study.
Absolutely.
It demands that we treat the text with the intellectual gravity it deserves, rather than treating it like a fairy tale.
It really forces us to look in the mirror rather than out into a mythical garden to find the source of the fracture. We are left to reflect on those boundaries, where biology ends, where symbolic psychology begins, and how theology weaves them together to explain the human condition.
Yeah. It asks us to look at the consequences of our own inherent lack and the lengths we go to in order to find completion in another.
So to our listeners, as you analyze the source material, we invite you to form your own conclusions. When you look back at that Sunday school diorama of Eden, ask yourself what is actually moving inside the garden, and more importantly, what is moving inside of us?